Hi, total recap here. Today we will be going through the events of the 2020 sci-fi thriller movie Archive, directed by Stephen Price. Warning, this video contains spoilers, so watch at your own risk. Now let's get right into the movie. The premise of the movie is set in 2038. A robotics engineer named George Almore has been working in an isolated facility in the middle of the woods in Japan for 2 years now. His main project is to advance a technology called the Archive, where one can extract and store a dead person's consciousness in analog format to allow 200 hours of interaction with the deceased. So far, he has created 2 prototype robots. The first robot he created is named J1, and the second one is J2. However, he has not been successful in developing the Archive format in any of them. J2 is more advanced than J1 in every aspect. She also helps George with everyday lab work and converses with him like a friend. At the beginning of the movie, we see George playing the prototype's favorite cartoon for her. J2 tells him of a dream she had last night. She was in a car with him in the dream. George tries to push her to tell him what else she saw, but J2 insists they were just driving. She doesn't remember anything else, but says that she was sad when she woke up. Later, George gets a video call from his wife, Jules, and the two talk. They have not met each other since he was sent to Japan. In the call, she breaks down into tears and tells him that she cannot talk to him anymore. George is shocked and tries to convince her otherwise, but she says her last goodbye and the call ends. Shocked, George sits by himself, imagining his last day with Jules. They were in a car as George drove, and the two playfully talk to each other. Jules tells him to put the vehicle in self-drive mode and talk to her, but he doesn't agree. Later, he gets on a call with Simon, his reporting manager, expecting results from the robots he's working on. She reminds him that it has been 2 years since he has been on this project, but has only come up with 2 horrible robots, referring to J1 and J2. Simon wants him to provide quick results with the next one. She asks him to back up the system to secure the place and ends the call. J2 has been listening to the conversation for the whole time. As soon as the call ends, she says she doesn't like Simon and calls her a bitch. She also reassures J1 that she isn't ugly, contrary to Simon's words. George gets back to work while he plays a video of his wife in the background. After J2, he has been working on the third prototype named J3. J3 will be designed to be highly intelligent and will look like humans, unlike J1 and J2. J2 peeks into the lab where George is working and looks at him building the new prototype. When the two go out later to fix the reception system, George calls out J2 for being unusually quiet. As it turns out, she is sad because he won't let her help him with the third prototype. She also complains that they used to be a team, but not anymore. George gets her concern and assures her that he is not going to replace her with J3, and it simply is just a new project. However, the robot doesn't buy his words. She knows that the new robot will not just look like a human, but will also be more intelligent than her. She tells him that she knows the new prototype will be better, but George insists that it will just be different. Annoyed by the conversation, George tells her to go inside because it is cold outside and she might get wet. Sometime later, he goes back to the station and assembles J3 for the first time. He installs an artificial intelligence into her. The prototype collects all of Jules' memory and her system storage doesn't handle. She begins to scream and shake. George comforts her and shuts her down for the moment. The following morning, George sees a dog at the entrance of the facility and chases it out. It commands the system to close the entrance, but the security system doesn't work for some reason. He asks J2 about the situation, but she claims she doesn't know what the problem is. George asks her for help and she seems instantly happier, making us believe that it was her who did something to the system so she could be closer to George. As they are repairing the system, 2 folks named Melvin and Vincent Sinclair arrive at the facility. They are the representative employees of the company that George works for. As he notices them arrive, George quickly orders J1 and J2 to stay in their station and out of the visitor's sight. They tell him that they are here to see his wife, suggesting that the prototype George is developing is to bring the consciousness of his dead wife back. As the two check the system of the facility, they find out that the security and the environmental system have been broken and patched. However, George denies anything of such sort happening and asks them to recheck. The two grow suspicious of him. After they leave, George knows that it won't take them long to find the evidence for their claim. He then goes back to the third prototype and examines her condition. He puts her out of hibernation and is surprised that she remembered his name. He asks if any of her memory feels solid and the robot begins to shake again. When George tries to send her back to hibernation, she stops and tells him to not do that again. She seems confused, so George makes her understand that the software is trying to piece memories together for her, so it is a tedious process, but eventually it will work and she will get new memories. From the following day, J3 is completely calm, so George tests her taste buds, feeding her flavors like vanilla and lime. Her sense of taste seems to be as good as a human's. He then checks her memory by making her read several words and memorize them. Later, he checks her empathy. The prototype is confused as to why she is going through so many tests when George explains that it is for him to understand her personality better. Then the robot notices and points out a scar on George's forehead. He reveals to her that it was from an accident. J3 then goes through several more tests and George encourages her to talk frequently so her throat doesn't go tight. Taking the opportunity, she tells him of the dream she has been getting, but she is not sure if she is dreaming or remembering past memories. Just then, J1 walks into the station and introduces herself to J3. George tells the latest robot that back when he was developing J1, she had problems with her mobility and he did not have time to fabricate her arms. Curious, J3 asks him if he is ever going to complete developing J1 and give her arms. He answers that he is working on it. To make her more familiar with the robots, he also shows J3 their cognitive ability. He explains that J1 stopped developing at age 5 to 6 while J2 did it at age 15 to 16. He then shows her a fully developed brain, which happens to be J3's. She is the most intelligent one of the robots. Meanwhile, J2 watches the event unfold through the surveillance monitors. She is devastated seeing George and J3 bond and is envious of her. From the following day, the lights and power supply in the facility start to go down. One evening, George goes to a town nearby when J2 puts her plan to sabotage J3 into action. While George returns, he reminisces of his last drive with Jules. He informs her of a job opportunity he had gotten in Japan, a contract for 3 years. Jules is happy for him and congratulates him. As they talk, a car comes flying towards them and hits them. George wakes up from a nightmare when the system alerts him of a breach in the residential area. He runs to his station and is surprised to see J3 missing. He launches the search drones and goes outside himself to look for her. As he walks through a trail, he hallucinates Jules walking beside him. They talk about archive technology. Jules thinks it is weird to bring back dead people's consciousness. George explains that it is just an analog that helps people to say goodbye to their dead ones properly. He adds that he misses her, suggesting that she is dead. Jules claims that she wouldn't want her consciousness to be trapped inside a machine. She then disappears. With no luck in finding J3, he returns to the facility. He opens one of the cupboards to get something when a weak body of the prototype falls onto him. She starts to panic and calls him a monster, but he calms her down. He then explains that J3's brain has biochemical elements in it and it is more than a computer. It is designed to extract analog signals and transform them into pattern recognition software, meaning that her brain is an archive system, and she has the ability to extract consciousness from the dead people. He has been trying to do the same with J1 and J2, but J3 is the most successful he has ever been. As they chat, George finds that J2 is the one who locked J3 inside. He confronts her and turns her power off in anger. After that, George begins to work harder on fully developing J3. He even replaces J2's legs with less advanced ones and uses hers for J3. After a few days, he completes developing J3 fully. She now looks exactly like a human female but with white skin. She is delighted to walk for the first time and goes out and explores nature. George then turns J2 on and she almost immediately asks what is wrong with her legs. She suspects he replaced them. However, George denies doing anything like that. J2 knows he is lying but doesn't confront him. She feels worthless and depressed. We see her taking long walks to the waterfall. One day she even loses her power on her way, but George is informed by J1. George examines J2 physically and sees that she has no visible damage. J2 then claims that no physical damage doesn't mean she is fine. George has been annoyed by her dramatic behavior for a long time now. He tells her to come talk to him only when she stops being so sentimental. George has been spending most of his time with J3, talking, singing, and dancing together, completely ignoring the other two prototypes. J2 cannot take this anymore, so she bids her last goodbye to J1 and goes to a nearby lake. She slowly goes into the water until she is soaked, destroying herself completely. Meanwhile, George sees that she is missing and looks for her everywhere until the system announces that all connection to J2 is lost. George, J1, and J3 pay their respect to J2 and bury her belongings together. At night, George gives J3 a portion of Jules' memory that focuses on feeling love towards George and being loved by him. She approaches a sleeping George and sleeps beside him as he dreams of him being with Jules. When he wakes up, he is startled and tells her to get out. J3 is embarrassed but obliges. The next day, Simon calls George and is furious because the company had found J2's body in the bottom of the lake. She fires George on the spot. Seeing her scream at George like that, J3 smashes the screen furiously. George later gets a call from Jules' archive and J3 picks it up. She tells Jules' consciousness that George is not available and that she will take care of him when Jules is completely gone. Jules, on the other end, is confused. Just then, George takes the phone from her and tells Jules that he will meet her soon. J3 realizes that George has been coding Jules' archive into her and that he plans to turn her entirely into Jules. She asks him what his motives are to make sure she is right. George tells her that he will erase all of her current memory and reprogram her completely into Jules. Since J3 thinks of herself as a whole person, she doesn't want to die and take in Jules' personality. She protests against it and out of frustration yells at him that Jules is dead. She then gets a gun from a case nearby and points it at him. George tells her it was his fault that Jules died and now it is his responsibility to bring her back. He assures J3 that they can have a future together, after which she reluctantly puts the gun away. She voluntarily sits to have Jules' consciousness embedded into her. George performs the procedure, knocking out J3. When she wakes up, she looks at George with knowing eyes and calls his name. George is over the moon to have brought his wife back. Just then, the phone rings, suggesting that Jules' consciousness is calling him. J3 had posed about her turning into Jules. George goes to pick up the phone while J3 warns him against it. From the other end, Jules tells him that this is the last time she will be able to speak to him. She reveals that George's archive system is going to expire. We finally get to know that George has been living as his consciousness through the archive system the whole time. In the final car accident, George had died and Jules had survived. Ever since, he has been living in a fake reality. His consciousness didn't want to accept the truth, so he created his fantasy land where he is still working on robots in Japan, while believing Jules was the one who died. The events from the beginning of the movie, except for the flashbacks, have just been his hallucination. The prototypes J1, J2, and J3 never existed. Jules has been talking to his consciousness now and then for the past 4 years, and this is their last phone call before his archive expires. In the end, Jules gives the phone to her little daughter as it turns out that she was pregnant during the accident. The daughter tells him that she loves him and says her last goodbye before the phone cuts. The movie ends as Jules and her daughter walk away from the archive headquarters after George's consciousness is buried. And that was my recap of the movie. Hope you enjoyed it. Now comment on what your favorite part was and make sure to hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel. Until next time, take care and goodbye.